The wheel cracked right in the middle of the market and gave out. The cart pitched forward, and the eggs rolled across the ground, breaking at the crowd's feet. Miss Ada dropped to her knees in the spilled yolk, grabbing at what was already lost. A man in an apron pointed and laughed. The laugh caught. In seconds, the whole market was laughing at her. What none of those laughing mouths knew was that one quiet man, way at the back of the market, had spent 30 years looking for this very woman. Long before the sun came up, Miss Ada was already on her feet. Every Thursday and every Saturday, it was the same dance. She lit the old wood stove while it was still dark out, the rooster crowing in the yard, and the kitchen warmed up slow while the bread rose. She sorted the eggs one by one, wiped each shell clean with a damp cloth, and laid them all in a basket lined with cotton. She filled her jars with the thick caramel cream that the whole town knew her for, the kind she stirred in the pot until her arm ached. At 63, she did it all herself, and she never complained. The work was the one thing that still gave the day a beginning, a middle, and an end. Her husband, Walter, had passed 6 years back. A tightness in his chest before dawn, and when she woke, he was already cold beside her. After that, the house felt too big for one person. But there was the cart. Walter had built that cart with his own 2 hands, board by board, over a whole winter of nights on the porch. He sanded every piece of wood by lamplight until it was smooth as silk. He used to say a good cart was like a good marriage. You had to build it slow and with care so it would last a lifetime. For Ada, pushing that cart down the dirt road in the cold morning was the closest thing she had left to walking arm in arm with her husband again. The market set up in the old square, right next to the church. Ada had held the same little corner for more than 20 years, right at the front gate, where folks passed first, and the smell of her bread caught everyone coming in. It was the best spot in the whole market, and there was one man who couldn't stand that. Royce ran the biggest stall in the place, 3 times the size of her little cart. He sold a bit of everything, shouted his prices louder than anybody, and treated the small sellers like rocks in his path. For months he'd been whispering in the market manager's ear that the gate spot deserved better than an old woman and a cart falling apart. And there was old Silas, a man around 70, tall, broad in the back, with thick hands from a lifetime of working the land. He showed up at the market now and then and hardly said a word. He'd pull up in a beat-up old truck, the kind that makes more noise than speed, buy a little from each small stall, and leave without trading 2 sentences. Nobody in town really knew who he was. They said he had a lot of land across the river, that he was truly rich, but lived plain as anybody. Ada had sold him eggs a few times. He always paid full price, never haggled, and gave her a good afternoon looking her right in the eye. That was all. But in a town where nobody looked at her anymore, a good afternoon and a look in the eye was worth a lot. That Saturday, the sky was clear and the market was packed. Ada pushed her cart through the gate like any other morning. Only the front wheel had been creaking for a week, a thin whine on every turn. She knew it. She'd asked a neighbor's boy to take a look, and the boy swore it would hold a while longer. It didn't. Right in the thick of the crowd, with the square full and everyone watching, the wheel cracked sharp and gave out. The cart crashed forward with a thud. The jars of caramel shattered on the stone and spread in a thick, shining mess. The eggs rolled everywhere, popping one after another, and the bread she'd pulled from the oven before dawn landed in the dirt, in the middle of the yolk and the broken glass. Ada knelt right there, in the middle of all of it, her hands rushing to save whatever could still be saved. That was when Royce, over at his stall, called out good and loud for the whole square to hear. "Well, would you look at that? Time to retire that cart, Miss Ada, and you right along with it." And he laughed at his own joke. The folks around him laughed too. One kid even clapped. A young woman pulled out her phone. Ada didn't lift her head. She stayed on her knees in the caramel, picking up eggshell, her face burning with shame and her hands shaking and shaking. 6 years after she buried her husband, a piece of her husband was lying there, broken on the market stone, with the whole world finding it funny. If that scene hit you in the chest just now, go ahead and drop a like, because what this Saturday is about to turn into, nobody in that square could have guessed. That was when a shadow stopped right beside her and blocked the sun. Ada looked up and saw old Silas, the man with the truck. He lowered that big body down slow, with effort, one knee at a time, until he was kneeling in the dirt beside her. He didn't say a word. He just started gathering the eggs that were left, one by one, with those huge, oddly gentle hands, like a man who'd handled fragile things his whole life. The square went quiet. The laughing died down little by little. Even Royce stopped laughing and just stared, not understanding. Silas gathered everything that could still be used and set it back in the basket, calm, in no hurry at all, as if there weren't a whole market around him. Then he stood, took off his hat, and said low, just for her to hear, "You've got nothing to be ashamed of." He took what was left of the bread, the caramel, the eggs, gathered it all up, and said he'd take it. He paid on the spot, full price, didn't haggle a cent. And before he left, he did a strange thing. He ran his hand slow along the wood of the fallen cart, like a man running his hand over an old animal. He stopped his fingers on the edge of one board, feeling the finish. He stayed like that a while, quiet. And then his voice caught and he asked, "Who made this cart, Miss Ada?" She answered that it was her late husband, Walter, with his own hands. Silas went quiet for a long while, just looking at the broken cart like it was talking to him. Then he nodded slow, thanked her, put his hat back on, and left in the old truck. Ada figured that was the end of it. Just another kind stranger on a bad day. The kind of kindness you get once and never run into again. She tied the bent wheel up with a piece of rope and dragged the cart home, the whole way, the axle scraping the dirt with every step. Monday morning, the market manager knocked on her door. He came embarrassed, crushing his cap in his hand, couldn't quite look at her. He said the market had decided to rearrange the spots, that the gate spot was going to a bigger, sturdier stall, one that fit the traffic at the entrance better. Ada understood right away whose idea it was. Royce had used the broken cart as living proof that she couldn't keep up anymore. The next Saturday, she'd lose the corner that had been hers for more than 20 years. The same patch of ground where Walter used to park the cart every morning, spread out the tarp, and say good morning to the customers before the church bell even rang. The whole week sat heavy as lead. Ada didn't even have the money to replace the broken wheel, let alone fight for a spot at the market. She thought about quitting for good, about selling the cart for scrap and putting an end to all of it. At night, sitting alone in the kitchen, her coffee going cold in front of her, she'd stare at her husband's picture on the wall and not know what to say to him. She wanted to say she was sorry, but she didn't even know what for. That was when Royce himself knocked on her door. He came all friendly, hat in hand, talking soft like he never had before. He said he'd heard about her trouble and came as a friend to help. He offered to buy her cart, for next to nothing, pocket change. He said he was doing her a favor, that this way she'd be rid of the old thing and walk away with a little money besides. He smiled the whole time he talked, but his eyes went straight to the wood of the cart, up and down, measuring every board, like a man who already knew exactly what he'd do with it. Ada stood there in the doorway, the offer right in her face. And she almost said yes. She was tired. She was alone. For a moment, it was easier to just let it all end at once. But before she could open her mouth to answer, the sound of an old engine came up the dirt road. Silas's truck stopped right in front of the house. He climbed down slow, shut the door, and looked at Royce standing on the step. He didn't say anything. He just looked. And Royce, for whatever reason, got all flustered, swallowed his words halfway, and started slinking off, almost backward, disappearing down the road. Silas came up the steps. He stood a while with his hat in his hand, in the middle of the kitchen, working up the nerve like a man about to say something he'd kept inside for a long time. And then he told her. 30 years earlier, he'd lost everything he had in the world. A brutal drought, the kind that cracks the ground open, wiped out his farm all at once. The cattle died, the well went dry, and the bank took the land. Silas became a man on the road, no direction, with the clothes on his back and nothing else. He walked for weeks, sleeping under a bridge, eating what he could find, until the hunger hurt worse than the shame. One afternoon, with no strength left, he knocked on the gate of a small farm just to ask for a plate of food. The man who opened it had rough, calloused hands and a gentle look, and his name was Walter. Walter didn't just give him the plate of food. He told him to come in, sit at the table, eat with the family. And when he saw the state the man was in, he offered him a corner in the barn to sleep and work on the farm to earn his keep. It was months of a roof, of bread, of honest work, with Walter never charging a thing, never asking a thing about his past. When Silas asked why he was doing all that for a stranger, Walter just shrugged and said one line that Silas carried for the rest of his life. "Nobody goes hungry here as long as I've got something to share." It was with what he learned in those months, with the example of that simple man, that Silas pulled himself together and got back up. He found work, then a piece of land, then more land. He planted, he harvested, he grew, and he became a rich man in his own quiet way. But he never forgot. For 30 years, Silas looked for that Walter to pay back somehow what he owed. When he finally tracked down the farm, years had gone by, and the news he got was the worst kind. The man had died, and the widow had moved away, nobody knew where. Silas lost the trail for good. He figured he'd never manage it. Until one ordinary Saturday, at a market square, he saw an old woman down on the ground next to a broken cart. And he noticed a board sanded by hand, smooth as silk, in the exact same way only one man in the world ever sanded wood. And there was one more thing. Silas said it slow, almost asking permission to tell her. The land where the market set up, that old square next to the church, was his. He'd bought it years back and let the town use it for free because he figured a town needed a place for plain folks to sell what they made. That manager who knocked on Ada's door on Monday, talking about rearranging spots, answered at the end of the day to him. Ada brought her hand to her mouth. Her legs went soft and she sat down in the kitchen chair, unable to say a thing. 30 years. The starving man her husband took in for free, without ever telling a soul, not even her, was standing in her kitchen, hat in hand, his eyes full of tears. The next Saturday, Silas got to the market early. He didn't shout, didn't make a scene, didn't raise his voice at anybody. He walked straight up to Royce's stall. Royce started off all smiles, rubbing his hands together, figuring the rich old man had come to do business with him. That smile slid right off his face as Silas spoke low and told him who he really was. The owner of the land. The owner of the square Royce stood on every single day. Royce stammered, tried to explain himself, said there'd been a misunderstanding, that he only wanted what was best for the market. Silas didn't answer him a word. He called the manager over in front of everyone and told him to undo that whole business of rearranging the spots right then. The gate corner stayed Miss Ada's, for good, in writing, on the record, never to be taken from her again. And the only stall that got smaller that day was Royce's, because Silas reminded the manager, calm, that a stall that humiliates a customer down on the ground in front of everybody didn't belong anywhere near the gate of his market. Royce still raised his voice, tried to say he had rights, that he'd get a lawyer, this and that. He looked around for somebody to take his side. But the same folks who'd laughed at Ada the week before were now staring at the ground, quiet. Nobody laughed along with him this time. Royce packed up his stall in silence and dragged it all off to a worse corner in the back, far from the gate, far from the traffic. But Silas didn't stop there. He took Walter's cart back to his own workshop out on the farm. He spent 3 nights fixing the broken wheel with his own hands, with real care, the same way old Walter would have done it if he'd been alive. He cut the new wood, fitted in, and sanded the replacement board until it was smooth, just like the others. You couldn't tell them apart. When it was done, he pushed the cart back the whole way to Ada's house himself and knocked on her door. When she opened it, He hardly said a thing. He just turned the cart to face her, the new wheel shining, and said, "It rolls again, the way Walter left it." Ada ran her hand over the wood, found the new board among the old ones, and couldn't even tell which one it was. And then she let go of the crying she'd been holding in for 6 years. The Saturdays were hers again. The cart rolled steady through the gate, and the caramel cream sold out before noon, because now the whole market had heard the story and made a point of buying from Miss Ada, even if it was just 1 jar, even if it was just to give away. Silas became a regular at her stall. Every week he'd pull up in the old truck, drag a little wooden stool over next to the cart, and sit there the whole morning, quiet, drinking coffee from a glass cup, watching the market go by. The two of them hardly talked. There was nothing to talk about. It had all been said another way, a way that didn't need words. Royce stayed at the market, squeezed into that back corner. He never apologized to anybody. Now and then he'd throw a sideways look toward the gate, and Ada just didn't pay him any mind anymore. That wound stayed open, and that was all right. Not every story ties up neat, and life rarely hands you the villain on a plate with an apology at the end. But there was another loose thread, and that one hurt for real. Silas had searched the whole world for 30 years to pay back a debt, and the man he wanted to hug and thank wasn't there anymore to see any of it. Walter died without ever knowing that the starving man he took in one drought afternoon had become a good man because of him. That was one debt life never let him settle. But every Saturday, still in the dark before the sun came up, Miss Ada pushed her husband's cart down the dirt road toward the market. The same cart they'd laughed at her over the week it broke on the ground. The same wood a man had wanted to buy for next to nothing to turn into firewood, and for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't pushing that cart alone. An old man with thick, calloused hands walked beside her in the early dark, in silence, holding the other end steady. Life's like that sometimes. The kindness you scatter around without expecting anything back can take 30 years to find its way home, but it comes home, and almost always, it chooses to come back right when you'd nearly given up on everything. Now let me ask you something. Do you believe a good deed, done with nobody watching and nothing expected in return, always finds its way back to the one who did it? Tell me down in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from while you're at it. I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, go ahead and hit that like button. Then subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story.